Listen closely to what I'm about to tell you. Before I reveal the truth about why she entered that mansion and never turned back, make sure to like this video and hit subscribe. Some tales aren't just meant to be heard, they're meant to haunt you forever. Never lose sight of your true self, no matter who forgets you, my mother whispered, her voice so faint it barely reached my ears, yet it echoed through my soul like a church bell. That particular morning, I offered her a steaming cup of chamomile tea, carefully placing it near her fragile hands. But she couldn't grasp it, her fingers had grown too frail, too weary. So I held the mug myself, letting its warmth seep through my palms while Vermont's autumn sky stretched above us like weathered gray fabric, silent and knowing, as if it understood the decision I was about to make. The woman resting in that bed bore little resemblance to the Sarah who once labored 14 hours daily at her tailoring shop, then returned home to mend the neighborhood's clothing without accepting payment. That version of my mother had possessed an inner fire. The Sarah was softer now, her body worn down by too many harsh winters and endless battles. I was departing that morning, not permanently, I convinced myself. Just temporarily, only until winter's end. Only until her medical bills were settled. Only until the crushing weight on her chest, both physical and emotional, lifted enough for her to breathe freely again. My plan involved marrying someone. I felt nothing for a stranger named Dominic Ashford. The agreement specified 3 years, sufficient time, adequate money, enough distance from everything familiar. I watched each breath she took, measuring the seconds. When her eyes opened and found mine, she managed a small smile. "You've always been braver than me," she said softly. I shook my head. "No, just quieter." Her hand rose to brush a strand of hair from my face before falling back to the blanket. Those were her final words before I left. Not a farewell, not a blessing, just that simple truth. Never lose sight of your true self. I couldn't bring myself to tell her that I already had. The Ashford estate emerged from the tree line like something from another era, another world entirely. Gray stone walls, towering windows, a slate roof, all wrapped in ivy that had turned deep crimson. It resembled a tomb more than a home. I stood at the entrance steps, suitcase in hand, my coat's hem brushing against my ankles. A silver-haired man with an overly tight tie introduced himself as Ellis. His expression remained stern as he guided me through the main hall with the solemnity of someone conducting a funeral service. "Mr. Ashford awaits you in his study," he announced. "Not your husband, not Dominic, just Mr. Ashford." So be it. The study was spacious and wood-paneled, carrying the faint aroma of whiskey and cedar. Sunlight filtered through high windows, making dust particles float like ash in the golden beams. Dominic stood with his back toward me, leafing through a folder. "You arrived punctually," he said without turning around. "That's how I was raised." When he finally faced me, his features appeared sharper than I remembered, more weary, more precise. His eyes held the only warmth about him, though even that was barely detectable. There was no kiss, no embrace, just a stack of documents placed between us on the desk. "Here's our arrangement," he stated. "Nothing has been altered." He wasn't lying. Every clause matched what I'd previously seen. No inheritance claims, no shared property, no expectation of affection. 3 years of discreet, separate lives in exchange for complete financial coverage of my mother's medical expenses. I signed each page methodically, my hands steady and eyes dry as I slid the final document back to him. Dominic added one more sheet handwritten, separate from the formal contract. "This is a personal condition," he said, placing it carefully before me. I read the words. "You must not enter the 3rd floor. Not for my sake, for yours. You won't want to discover what lies behind that door." I looked up. His expression remained unchanged, but something flickered there, briefly, something heavy, Perhaps shame, perhaps memory. What's up there? I asked. He remained silent, turning toward the window, his hand gripping the desk's edge until his knuckles went white. There are things we keep locked away, he said quietly. Not because they're dangerous, but because we don't trust ourselves to look at them again. The wedding ceremony was brief, not rushed, simply restrained. The kind of event you'd expect. At the conclusion of a business negotiation, no guests attended, just a minister with a polite smile. I was standing in back, and 2 signatures awaiting completion. I wore the dress my mother had sewn when I was 16, thinking I'd wear it for love someday. Dominic wore gray no tie, no boutonniere. Do you, Mr. Ashford? Yes. And do you, Miss Hart? Yes. No vows, no rings, no flowers, only a glance exchanged like a business deal closing. That evening, I lay alone in a guest room on the 2nd floor, not the master suite, not our room. The window overlooked a winter garden gone silent. The walls were cream and dusty rose, trimmed in walnut. The air held hints of lavender and wood polish. I unpacked a single dress, folded my coat, placed my tea tin from home on the nightstand. Then I retrieved the folded handwritten paper from my bag's inner pocket, the one not part of the legal contract, yet somehow feeling more binding. Not for my sake, for yours. I stared at those words until they blurred. It wasn't the threat that haunted me. It was the compassion, the idea that something upstairs might harm me, not him. That he believed I wasn't prepared for it that first night. I began wondering what exactly he thought I'd discover behind that. Door, more troubling still. The 3rd floor didn't call to me. It watched, as if it knew I was the type of person who peered through keyholes. Daily life at Ashford, a state settled into a rhythm that didn't require me to belong. No one instructed me where to sit, what to do, or when to speak. The house simply opened its doors at sunrise and let me drift through it like a ghost, undecided about haunting. I began rising before the staff. I enjoyed how light crept through tall windows, painting golden patterns on the floors. I prepared my own tea and toasted my own bread. The kitchen didn't seem to mind. Dominic and I rarely crossed paths, not at breakfast, not in the corridors, not even when I wandered into the music room and let my fingers trail across the grand piano's silent keys. His silence didn't offend me. If anything, it mirrored my own. Neither of us had come here seeking companionship. Still, I observed. I learned he departed every morning at exactly 8 and returned at 6:30. I discovered he avoided the main staircase, using only the side one nearest the east wing. And I noticed that every door on the 3rd floor remained locked except one at the corridor's end, the door without a keyhole. On my 4th morning, I found the library. It wasn't marked, just a plain door behind a velvet curtain in the sitting room tucked between a globe and grandfather clock. Inside was a cathedral of shelves reaching floor to ceiling, warm with the scent of paper and dust. Books filled every inch, novels, histories, old legal texts, and poetry with broken spines. I couldn't explain why it felt like trespassing. I settled in the window seat and blindly selected a book, an aged copy of Persuasion with soft edges and fox pages. When I opened it, something slipped out. A photograph, black and white, slightly curled. 2 women standing side by side before the Ashford fountain. One wore a summer dress with tiny flowers. The other wore a crisp, clean maid's uniform. I didn't recognize them immediately, but studying the woman in uniform more closely made my breath catch. It was Sarah May Sarah, 20 years younger, perhaps more. Her smile was different than unconstrained, free. The woman beside her was beautiful, sharp cheekbones, graceful hands, eyes that held their own light. I didn't need to ask. That was Eleanor. I turned the photo over. A note in faded blue ink read, "To Ellie, you were always more than a friend. Love." Sarah. The words blurred momentarily, not from tears, but because something loosened inside me. Something I hadn't known was coiled there. I replaced the photo in the book and left the library without taking anything else. But next time I encountered Ellis, I asked, did Sarah work here? His eyebrows rose slightly. Yes, long ago, with Eleanor. They were close. I waited for more, but he offered nothing additional, and I didn't push. Some stories can't be forced out. They must rise on their own. That evening, I waited in the drawing room without knowing why. Part of me hoped Dominic might enter not to talk, just to see that I remained here. Instead, I sat in silence, staring at the fire and thinking about Sarah, about Eleanor, about the message on that photograph. You were always more than a friend. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't dramatic. It was the kind of thing you write when words fail you, but you want someone to read between the lines. I couldn't ask Sarah now. Her illness had progressed too far, and perhaps she'd never wanted me to know. But something about that photograph burned at the edges of my thoughts. Why was it hidden in a book? Why was it left behind? Had she forgotten it, or had she meant for me to find it? I slept poorly that night, not from fear, but from questions. Why hadn't Dominic mentioned their connection? Why had Sarah never told me she'd lived in this house? And what had happened between her and Eleanor that left the air around the third floor so suffocating? The following morning, I returned to the library and searched the same shelf, finding persuasion again. This time, no photo, just a folded paper scrap tucked inside the cover. It was part of a letter, torn at the top. She claims to trust her, but I've seen how she looks at him. Perhaps Sarah doesn't realize what she's doing, or perhaps she does. But I won't remain here to be humiliated. It wasn't signed, but I recognized that voice. Even an inkit carried an edge. Suddenly, the mystery of the third floor no longer belonged to Dominic alone. It belonged to my mother and to the woman she may have loved and lost. Some people exit through the front door. Others slip away without sound, without goodbye, leaving only empty rooms to remember them. I hadn't planned to go upstairs. I told myself I was merely walking, exploring, learning the creaks and groans of a house too large for its own silence. But my feet knew better, carrying me step by step to the third floor landing where the air felt slightly cooler, as if the house was holding its breath. The corridor stretched long, lined with tall windows and paintings angled just enough to feel like they were listening. The carpet was older here, faded in places, as though time itself had worn a path from habit rather than footsteps. 3 doors, 2 locked, 1 open. The one at the end, the one without a keyhole. I paused, then pressed my hand to the doorknob. It didn't resist, turning soundlessly as the door eased inward like it had been waiting. No creak, no protest, just a hush and the faint scent of lavender, old paper, and something harder to name, like longing that hadn't had time to fade. The room wasn't grand, it was personal, intimate. Light spilled through sheer curtains, dust turning in it like falling ash. A vanity stood near the window, still holding a silver hairbrush. A blue shawl with white embroidery had been left on the chair's back, its thread frayed but intact. A pair of books were stacked neatly on the knitstand beside a porcelain teacup with a crack running through its side. On the bed lay a notebook. I walked slowly, uncertain whether I was trespassing on a memory or a ghost. I picked up the notebook. Inside, the handwriting was fine and deliberate. It didn't need a signature. I knew it was Eleanor's. She had written about the house, the cold spots, how her reflection sometimes looked older than her actual face, the garden she'd tried to plant, the room she avoided. The nights Dominic didn't come to bed, she wrote about Sarah, Sarah laughs in the kitchen like she owns the walls. Dominic pretends not to hear her, but I do. I wonder if it's jealousy or relief. Sometimes I think she sees me better than he does. Then again, she sees too much. Even the things I try not to fill dot page after page, Eleanor unraveled herself in. Ink, I felt like I was eavesdropping on someone falling apart. Halfway through the book, a change occurred. The lines became sharper, less wondering, more cutting. He looked at her again today. I saw it. Maybe he doesn't even realize. Maybe she doesn't either, but I'm not stupid. She used to be mine before she became convenient for him. That stopped. Me cold. She used to be mine. There it was in black and white, the thing the photograph had only hinted at. They had loved, and it had ended not with tragedy, but with betrayal, or at least the belief in it. The final pages were torn out. I sat back on the bed, staring at the empty spine where the end of her story should have been. No conclusion, no resolution, just silence. I should have left then, should have closed the door and pretended I hadn't read what wasn't meant for me. But there was one drawer in the vanity that remained unopened, and something inside me whispered, "Finish it." I slid it open slowly. Inside, folded carefully, was a letter addressed not to Dominic or Sarah, but to someone else, someone named Adele. Dear Adele, I should have told you what I saw, but by the time I realized it, it felt too late. I can't stay here, not with him, not with her. The walls are closing in, and I don't trust what I feel anymore. I don't trust myself. I thought Sarah was mine, but she made her choice. Tell them. I left because I needed space. That's true enough. Just don't tell them I saw it. Don't tell them about the night in the library. They'll know what it means, and I can't be the one to break it all. I folded the letter, my hands trembling. Slightly not because of Eleanor's pain, but because I had no idea what the night in the library meant. No idea what she'd seen, only that it had shattered something between three people, none of whom had ever told me the complete truth. I returned the letter and stood in the room's center, taking one final look. Something strange caught my attention. There was no dust on the teacup, no layer of time on the shawl. Someone had cleaned here recently, Dominic, Ellis, someone else. Or perhaps no one had ever really left. I closed the door behind me without locking it. I didn't have the key. But I understood something now. Dominic hadn't locked the third floor to keep me out. He had locked it to stop time from finishing what it started, and perhaps I had just restarted the clock. I wasn't seeking a confrontation, but sometimes silence becomes so loud it forces you to speak just to hear yourself over it. That night, wind screamed through cracks in the window panes like it had something urgent to say, the kind of wind that made you believe walls could whisper and doors could. Breathe. I tried to sleep but couldn't. Eleanor's voice kept running through my head. Not her real voice, but her ink, her suspicion, her grief, her unfinished story, and that letter meant for Adele but clearly intended to be discovered eventually. Had she seen in the library? What had happened that made her leave without warning, without goodbye? And how was Sarah involved? I found myself standing in the hallway outside Dominic's study, barefoot, arms crossed against the cold, with no plan. And too many questions. The door was open. He was inside, standing near the fireplace, one hand pressed to the mantel, the other holding a glass of something dark. He turned when he heard me, but didn't speak. He didn't need to. You knew she was close to Sarah, didn't you? I said. His jaw tightened. The glass in his hand lowered slightly. Yes. Why didn't you tell me? Would it have changed your mind? He asked quietly. I didn't answer because I didn't know. I stepped into the room, my voice dropping. Eleanor thought Sarah betrayed her. His shoulders stiffened. Then slowly, he sat down not with defeat, but with weariness. Eleanor thought many things, and you never corrected her. He looked up at me then for the first time since the wedding, really looked. She didn't want the truth. She wanted proof that her pain had a villain. I was convenient. So was Sarah. So you let her go? No, he said, and this time his voice cracked just enough to break something between us. She left before I had the courage to stop her. Silence followed, not the heavy kind, but the waiting kind. Like the air between seconds of a ticking clock. He poured another drink and offered me one. I shook my head. He drank it slowly, then set the glass aside. You think I'm cold? He said. You. Or he didn't flinch. You think I married you out of convenience, didn't you? A pause. Then he said something I didn't expect. I married you because Sarah once told me I'd forgotten how to be decent. She said I needed someone who wasn't afraid of quiet, someone who would notice the parts of the house I'd stopped looking at. So this was her idea. No, he said, but it would have made her smile. I sat down across from him. The fire crackled between us, throwing golden shadows across the floor. What happened to her, to Sarah and Eleanor? I don't know the whole story, he admitted, but I know they loved each other. I know they hurt each other. And I know Eleanor saw something, or thought she did, that made her believe Sarah had crossed a line with me. He didn't confirm it. He didn't deny it either. Then, after a long silence, he asked the question I didn't see coming. Do you think you're like her, Sarah? No, he said, eyes locked on mine. Eleanor. I didn't answer right away because I didn't know how to explain. But I saw myself in both, in the silence, in the waiting, and the rooms we both walked into hoping to feel whole, only to find ghosts that weren't ready to speak. I stood up, suddenly tired. Good night, Dominic. He looked like he wanted to say something more, but he didn't until I reached the door. Isabel. I turned. I didn't lock the third floor because of Eleanor, he said. I locked it because I was afraid of what I'd left up there, of the version of myself I'd become when I stopped asking for forgiveness. He didn't ask me to stay. He didn't apologize. But something about that confession, that bare, honest line when I stopped asking for forgiveness, felt more intimate than any vow I could have written. I left the room and walked the halls alone, the wind still tapping at windows like a child wanting in. In that moment, I didn't know if I trusted Dominic, but I knew this. He wasn't the only one who had something to be forgiven for. Sometimes healing begins not with grand gestures, but with the sound of two forks scraping the bottom of an empty bowl. The next morning, the house was quiet again, but something in it had shifted. I didn't see Dominic at breakfast, not that I expected to, but the air in the hallway no longer felt like it was holding something back. Instead, it felt expectant. I spent most of the morning in the kitchen. It wasn't mine, but the cook was off that day, and the staff had learned to give me space without asking why I needed it. I found carrots in the cellar, potatoes, a small cut of beef that looked like it had been meant for someone else. I made stew simple, old-fashioned, the kind my mother Sarah had taught me to make, with nothing more than leftover herbs and good instinct for timing. I didn't know who. I was making it for maybe her, maybe him, maybe me. By evening, the scent had filled the downstairs halls, clinging to drapes and creeping under doors, comforting in a way that didn't ask permission. I set 2 bowls on the long wooden table in the dining room, lit the low lamps overhead, and waited. 5 minutes, 10, 15. I told myself I would eat alone. But then I heard footsteps, measured, clean, familiar. Dominic appeared in the doorway, coat removed, tie still askew, eyes unreadable. He said nothing, just looked at the table, then at me. You made dinner. I made stew, I corrected. The house was cold. He didn't move right away, but then he crossed the room and sat down. His movements were slower than usual, like he wasn't sure what to expect. We ate in silence, the kind that wasn't heavy, just real. Two people chewing in rhythm, not because they were trying to match, but because they finally had a reason to slow down. This is good, Dominic said, nearly at the bottom of his bowl. I glanced up. You sound surprised. He smiled, a small, slanted thing, almost reluctant. I haven't had this since ... He stopped. Since Eleanor? No, he said. Since Sarah. The name stopped both our hands for a second. He leaned back in his chair, eyes distant. It was a night like this, he said. Wind howling, power had gone out in the West Wing. Eleanor was upstairs. I'd been gone for Dave's business trip to Montreal. I came back, and Sarah had made stew. No one else in the house, just her in the kitchen like nothing had ever gone wrong. Did she say anything? No, he said. She just handed me a bowl, sat down, watched me eat. And I think it was the first time in months I didn't feel like I was made of stone. I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. Instead, I poured him another helping. He accepted it, this time not eating as fast, taking his time. As if he knew this moment didn't need to be filled with noise. After dinner, I started to gather the dishes. He stood. Leave him, he said. Someone has to. I'll do them. I turned to face him, slightly amused. You wash dishes? Only when it matters. He picked up the bowls and took them to the sink. I watched him rinse the stew pot, roll up his sleeves, and start scrubbing with careful, practiced movements. There was something deeply human in it, a man with too many ghosts finally doing something for the living. Why did Sarah really leave? I asked quietly. He kept scrubbing. You mean leave the house? Leave everything? He paused, rinsed, dried his hands on a towel, then turned to me. Because she believed silence was better than damage. She thought leaving was safer than explaining. Safer for who? Everyone. Did she love Eleanor? He looked down for a moment, then back up. Yes, and you? A longer pause. I think she pitied me, he said softly, which is a kind of love, but not the kind I wanted. That answer stayed with me longer than anything else because it wasn't sad, it was honest. And sometimes honesty sounds like grief. I was heading toward the staircase when he spoke again. She told me something once. I turned. What? That I needed to stop locking away the things I didn't want to face, that the house was starting to mirror me, cold, quiet, untouched. He walked toward the window and looked out into the garden. She said one day I'd meet someone who wouldn't just open the door. She'd walk through it and sit down and stay. He didn't look at me. Didn't need to. Was that your way of saying thank you for dinner? I asked gently. That made him smile again, a real one this time. Not why, but sure, maybe. I went upstairs, not quite knowing what had changed, only that something had. Not in the way we looked at each other, but in the fact that we finally had. I stepped into my room, the fire in the grate just starting to die down. There on the table by the window sat a small object I hadn't left there, a silver spoon, old and engraved. It matched the set Eleanor had kept on her vanity. Attached was a folded note. She used to use this when she didn't want to eat alone. You don't have to either. Just like that, a locked door opened. Not on the third floor, but inside me. Some nights don't start with a kiss. They start with a silence so heavy that the only way to break it is skin against skin. The storm hit just after midnight. Rain came first soft at first, then heavy, then wild, like the sky had been waiting too long to let go. I couldn't sleep. The room was too warm, or maybe I was. The fire had died down, but something else in me was burning slow and steady under my ribs. Behind my breath, I tried to read, then gave up. I walked barefoot down the hallway, passing portraits I no longer feared, passing locked doors that no longer whispered dot. The light under the study door was still on. I didn't knock. Dominic sat in a leather armchair, sleeves rolled, shirt unbuttoned, At the collar, a book half open in his hand. He didn't look surprised to see me, just nodded once. An invitation or permission. I walked in and stood near the fire, my arms crossed more out of habit than modesty. Couldn't sleep, I said. The rain's loud tonight, he replied. Old roof, it listens to weather. A pause. I saw your note. I meant it. We stood like that for a moment, him seated, me standing, the storm crackling outside like the end of something. Long and tired. Do you ever regret it? I asked Dot. He looked up. What? Locking everything away. Pretending you could live without closeness. His eyes didn't leave mine. They darkened slightly. I don't pretend. I live with the hunger. That was the moment something broke, or maybe something finally gave in. I stepped closer slowly. He didn't move, didn't breathe, and when I reached his hand rose tentative, then firm resting on the back of my neck. No words, just heat. He pulled me onto his lap, not like a man pulling a lover, but like someone finally claiming something long denied. Our mouths met in a kiss that wasn't sweet. It was rough, searching, unfinished. I gasped when he slid his hand under the hem of my nightdress, finding my thigh, then higher. You're shaking, he whispered. I know. Do you want this? Yes. He stood, lifting me as if I weighed nothing, carried me across the room, up the stairs to the master bedroom I'd never seen before. The room was dark, except for one lamp. The bed was large, the sheets cool. He laid me down like I was something to unwrap, no rush. No demand, just steady hands and a gaze that never left mine. His shirt was gone first, then mine, then nothing. But the sound of breath, skin against skin, heartbeats crashing into rhythm. He kissed me everywhere, along my collarbone, down my chest, across my stomach. He whispered things I couldn't hear over the thunder, but I felt them in the way his mouth slowed, in the way his fingers learned the shape of my hips like reading. Braille in the dark. When he entered me, I cried out, not in pain, not in shock, but in surrender. He held still, forehead resting against mine, breathing me in. We moved together like people who didn't know the steps, but followed the same music anyway, faster, deeper, then slower again, like neither of us wanted it to end. Afterward, he didn't speak, didn't pull away. He just held me, one hand tangled in my hair, the other drawing lazy patterns across my spine. I pressed my ear to his chest, listening not to his heartbeat, but to the silence, the kind that only came after the truth. What now? I asked finally. Now we learn what this means, he replied. And if it doesn't mean anything, he kissed my shoulder. Then we make it mean something. We didn't fall asleep quickly, but we didn't speak again either. We didn't need to. The room knew what we were, two people who had lost too much and finally found something they were willing to lose. Again, just to feel alive. But as I drifted off, something in the corner of the room caught my eye. A box on the dresser, not locked, just closed. Carved initials on the top, A.A., Eleanor Ashford. I knew whatever this night was, it wasn't the end of a story. It was the beginning of the truth. Some truths don't scream when uncovered. They sit quietly in a box, waiting for the one person brave enough to open them. I waited until Dominic left for town the next morning. He hadn't said much, just a soft kiss on the side of my head, a promise to return before dusk. I pretended to sleep, even though I'd been watching the light change on the ceiling for the last hour. As soon as the front door closed, I rose, wrapped myself in his robe, walked barefoot into the master bedroom, and stood before the dresser. The box was still there, Eleanor Ashford. The lid wasn't locked, just resting, like she'd always meant it to be found, but never dared to open it again herself. My fingers trembled as I lifted it. Inside, a small collection of keepsakes, a broken locket, a silk ribbon, a pair of opera Gloves yellowed with time, and beneath it all, a stack of letters tied in green string. I sat on the edge of the bed and untied them. One by one, the first letter was dated nearly 2 decades ago, before Dominic's marriage, before Sarah left. They were written from Eleanor to Sarah, every page soaked in longing, in doubt, in guilt. I shouldn't want you. I know that. But every time you walk into the garden, I forget why we ever promised to stop. I hear him talking about you. He doesn't know it's more than kindness. He thinks he's protecting you. He doesn't see that I'm the one who needs protection from myself. Then came the letters after. Sarah left the estate. You were brave. You did what I couldn't. But now I'm here alone, and he doesn't ask why you left. He just asks where you put the scissors. Dominic thinks you and I were nothing. But I dream of you every night, and when I wake up, I touch the empty half of the bed and pretend your warmth hasn't left. I want to hate you, but I can't. I stopped. Reading, my throat was tight, not from jealousy, but from grief for them both. 2 women who tried to love quietly in a world that demanded silence and lost everything to it. At the bottom of the stack, folded differently from the others, was a final letter, not signed, not dated, but written in trembling ink. I saw it in the library. The file, the contract, the signatures. Sarah never betrayed me. She protected me. He asked her to stay, to pretend, to marry him so the rumors would stop, so I wouldn't be ruined. She agreed. She left me because she loved me, and I punished her for it. I punished both of them. I thought the silence was theirs, but it was mine. I closed the door. I left. I wrote the story the way I wanted to believe it because the truth was too kind for my anger to survive. I pressed the letter to my chest. It was the first time I cried not for myself, not even for Sarah, but for Eleanor, who died believing her love had become betrayal until it was too late. I spent the next hour walking the house, not pacing, not searching, just letting the walls speak again. Every painting, every locked door, every window. This house had been a stage for their pain. Now it had become a place of reckoning. When Dominic returned, I was waiting for him in the study. He saw my face, didn't ask what happened, just walked toward me and pulled me into his arms. You opened it, he said, not as a question. Yes, he exhaled slowly, like the house itself had finally let out its breath. She knew, didn't she, Sarah? Yes, she left to protect Eleanor, not to run from her. Sarah knew the price, he said. She paid it without hesitation. And you? He paused. I tried to be the villain. I thought if I became the reason Eleanor hated her, at least her anger had somewhere to go. You carried it all these years. So did you, he said softly. You just didn't know it yet. We sat down in silence, his hand in mine, no fire, no music. Just the sound of something between us settling, like soil after rain. Then he reached into his coat and handed me a small envelope. She sent this to me a week before she passed. I never opened it. I looked at him. Why?